everyone, and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host, Matthew Head, and in this episode, I'm talking to Jamie Waller. He's a serial entrepreneur who has built and sold many businesses. He now works in investing with companies, but his heart is in... let me start again. He's a serial entrepreneur who has built and sold many businesses. He now invests in companies, but his heart really is in the creative side of building businesses. He's a founder and former chair of the Prince's Trust Entrepreneur Network and sponsor of the IMPS motorcycle team. He's also an author of 2 books, Unsexy Business and new out this year in 2014, The Dyslexic Edge. As always, I'll put links to his books, businesses and other things we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Thank you, Matt. I hate to pick you up on something. 2024, the new book, not 2014.
Did I say to? I've got 24 written in the pad. So
you did, but we're in the right company, so that's okay. Actually, this is great timing, Matt, because the book comes out tomorrow, 12th of September. So we are talking just before that, and this will surely go out to your audience just after that. So
yes, it will, a few weeks after it. So yeah. We're doing well. I passed the test of being a dyslexic person. I did once on one episode ask somebody how their learning to dive was going, and actually they'd learned to drive. Cool. But where I wanted to start this episode off really was, motorcycles and me go well together. So motorcycle display teams, the IMPS. You got into riding for that display team as a child. How did that come about?
I did, yeah. So I grew up in East London, Bethnal Green, and that was, this was Bethnal Green before people wore Havianas and carried iPads around. This was when wore steel toe cap boots and had coal stains on their face still. But look, I grew up in a 2-bedroom flat above a shop, quite a poor part of London. Mum and I were at a local fete at London Fields in Hackney. We saw these kids riding these motorcycles. It was called the IMPS motorcycle display team. I sort of tugged on Mum's arm. I was age 5, said I'd love to do it. Mum was she wasn't a very confident lady, my mum, but somehow she took herself off to ask them how we could get involved. And the IMPS, which we didn't know at the time, was purely an East London adventure project. So it was set up for disadvantaged children from East London to give them a break away from inner city life and take them away each weekend. So age 5, I did a selection course. I got a place in the IMPS motorcycle display team, which meant every single weekend and every school holiday I spent away from home. And I spent 11 years there from age 5 to 16. So age 5, I learned to ride a motorbike. By age 11, I could ride one backwards. By age 14, I could jump them through fire. And by age 15, I could jump motorbikes over cars. So adventure and risk-taking has been a core part of my life.
Yeah, brilliant. Did you have any inkling for motor vehicles and motorcycles before that? Or really was it just seeing that display team thinking, that looks cool, Mum?
Yeah, I think, a 5-year-old boy, right? Motorbikes, would be attracted to it. But I've continued to ride my whole life. I have 2 daughters now, 7 and 8. Both of them ride. And I think you mentioned in the intro, I'm now the main sponsor of that charity and have been for 20 odd years. It's very close to my heart. Actually, just before we jumped on this call tonight, I was just on the phone to the founder, who's like a father to me. He's now 86. And he's still running that charity, which is pretty exceptional.
Wow, that is really cool. And how nice to go full circle from it picking you up out of your life in Bethnal Green round to being able to afford to sponsor the team to help other people.
Oh, yeah, it's been wonderful. And, Roy's like a father to me who runs the IMPS. It not only helped me immensely as a young boy from East London, but it helped my mum too. My mum was in an abusive relationship with an alcoholic father, and it gave her the confidence to know that I was going to be okay, to live her life. So it was truly, it's easy I always say it's quite easy to find sort of 75-year-old white men go, especially dyslexic, go, look at me, it's okay, look how well I did. But there's always a lot more to it, right? And the IMPS is a lot more to it. A very supportive mum and a brilliant charity, a very small charity, but a brilliant one and one that transformed my life.
Yeah. If anybody hasn't seen what the displays the IMPS do, look it on YouTube. It's really cool what they do. Think about loads of people on a triangle across 4 motorcycles. You're in the right place. So let's get you onto dyslexia and what point in your life do you think you found out you were dyslexic?
I mean, I guess I always knew. The problem is, I was born in 1979. I'm 45. Dyslexia wasn't really a thing. You were just
Hmm.
considered to be thick, right? And I did really well at primary school. I loved school, absolutely loved it. And then school typically changes from giving you awards for turning up and being happy and dressing well to start to score you for your education attainment. And I just wasn't very good. And I guess at that stage, I had convinced myself that I was stupid, because I was just being told that all the time. And then age 10, 11, you sit some tests to get to choose your secondary school. All my friends went off to the better secondary school in Bethnal Green. I went to the worst one. I got bullied terribly. I then became the bully. I then just opted out of school and never went, left school without even sitting a GCSE. It's not that I sat them and didn't get the qualifications. I didn't even sit one. I just wanted out of the system. I hated it. The education system had really let me down, and I just wanted to be a million miles away from it and get on with work. But it took me until I was 36 until I was brave enough to come out and tell people that I was dyslexic. So I got a diagnosis at age 36. And it's only been really the last 9 years that I've been brave enough to say, hey, I'm dyslexic. I need some help with this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, 36. What do you think kind of spurred you on to get the diagnosis at that age? Was there a particular event you're like, hang on, I do that?
Yeah, two things actually. I'd met my wife 2 years before, and my wife is dyslexic, but yet we come from very different backgrounds. My wife went to a fee-paying boarding school
Mm.
in Oxfordshire and left school, went on to university, got a high-grade degree from a reputable university, worked as an art buyer in the west part of London. And so that definitely was the start of me thinking, okay, so dyslexia doesn't necessarily equal low IQ or thickness. Maybe I could uncover myself and tell the truth. But then what happened is actually I sold my first business, age 36. I'd built a business for 12 years. I sold it for over 40 million quid. I owned it all. And I wondered, what am I going to do next? And I thought I'd done a 3-week executive education program at Stanford University during owning my business, and I loved it. So I decided after selling my business, I wanted to do an MBA, but I only wanted to do one with one of the best business schools in the country. So I wrote to Harvard, Stanford, and LBS, who were ranked in the top 5 for their executive MBA program. Harvard ignored me. Stanford responded. I did interviews with both, and LBS said to me, have you ever thought that you might be dyslexic? I said, no, because I was no way I was going to break cover, right? I wanted to get on their course. I had written to them to say, wouldn't it be wonderful if one of the best business schools in the world accepted someone on their executive MBA program who didn't have a single GCSE? What great branding and marketing that would be. There was no way I was going to highlight it, but LBS asked if I would undertake a test. I undertook a test, and I thought, that's it. I've been discovered. But they accepted me. So I was given what I already knew. I'm dyslexic. I was given a position on their executive MBA program, which I lasted all of 9 weeks, and then found it too difficult, obviously, and had to leave. But it was really those combined events, more my wife than the LBS part, that just thought, you know what? I'm going to tell the world that I'm dyslexic, and I've been hiding it because I had been living in this shell of who I really was. I was unable to be myself. I was unable to really explore what I was capable of. And I've achieved more in the 9 years that I've come out and told people about my dyslexia than I achieved in the 36 years prior. So I am a big advocate for giving people the confidence to say, I am dyslexic, and it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah. I must admit, I found out in my life that actually starting a podcast and talking about dyslexic and actually just telling people that I am dyslexic myself, you get more done after that. It's surprising how liberating it can be.
It's completely liberating. I sometimes refer to it what it must be like for a homosexual person who's just been in that closet for so long, waiting to just tell the world. And it's the same for people that are neurodiverse, and they're hiding something. They're petrified of being found out. And then when they finally come out, it's this huge weight off your shoulders, and it makes you walk a couple of inches taller. It gives you the confidence that you just, I'm a confident chap anyway, but I gave myself a 15% boost that week, by saying, well, it's no longer a problem. But don't underplay it. It was easier for me. I had 40 million quid in the bank, and I had a beautiful wife that I was about to marry that was also dyslexic. It's a lot different for some people. And so I said a little while ago, it's really easy to find 75-year-old white men tell you that dyslexia is not a problem because look at them. Try being black with dyslexia. Try being an immigrant with dyslexia. Try being an Indian female where education matters so much to the family with dyslexia. Everybody has a different route into how they deal with dyslexia. So I'm not a fan of simply changing the message from deficit to superpower. I think dyslexia is an Achilles heel. It travels with you every day, and there's not a day that goes past that it doesn't have an element of a negative effect on my life.
Yeah. I think superpower things, I understand why people do it, but I do feel it's a little bit disingenuous. I mean, it's got strengths, but the strengths come with shadows.
Exactly, and it's not useful. Matt, it's not useful for us to say, what are we doing for the next generation if we simply say, dyslexia is a superpower, so carry on like the way you've been dealing with it for the last 50 years. It's really not useful because society hasn't dealt with it correctly. School systems haven't dealt with it correctly, both state and private school. My children are fortunate to be in a fee-paying school, and they are not much superior at dealing with it than the state school sector, in my opinion. So it affects everybody in so many different ways.
Yeah. So it does, and it's great that you highlight the difference between people from different backgrounds. You say when you got £40 million in the bank, I guess you what's the non-sweary version of this thing? But you don't have to care as much, I guess, would be how people kind of see you and stuff, and you can take the bigger risk.
Or it gives you the resource and the power to care more, actually. So, growing up, I was born dyslexic with ADHD, colorblind, and poor. And those things have an impact on my entire being. And I'm no longer poor, but it's still an integral part of who I am, having been poor. And when I had the fortunate ability to sell my first business and make some money, one of the first things I wanted to do was dedicate a lot of time back. And you mentioned in the intro, I was fortunate at age 11 when I was in the motorcycle display team. It was about to go bankrupt, and it was the Prince's Trust that gave a grant to the imps to enable it to continue. So when I first made my real wealth and became independently wealthy, I was like, well, what do I want to do? I'd already been supporting the imps since I was 26 years of age. But then I went into the Prince's Trust, and I was really fortunate that I was invited by the then Prince, our now King, to set up the enterprise network for them about how to give back to young, less advantaged people that want to start and grow businesses. So, these things do take a full circle. And I believe that everybody that's had a negative start or a negative event in life, if they can, should be able to play it forward, play their experience forward so that people can learn from it and benefit from it and make shortcuts, right? It took me until I was 36 to come out and tell people I was dyslexic. If we can get people to say it at 8 rather than 36, that's going to give them an additional 20 odd years of life where they're going to be much more comfortable with themselves.
Yeah, psychological safety, if you imagine the utopia where you could say at 8 and nobody bullies you or takes the mickey out of you for that. How beautiful that would be. So what I wanted to kind of circle to is starting businesses. Obviously, you said about leaving school early and you just had to get out of there as fast as you could. No GCSEs. So was it kind of starting businesses was something you had a passion for, or you suddenly thought, well, I need to start businesses because I'm stuck otherwise?
Well, it's an interesting question, actually. I don't think I've ever been asked that, but I'd always done things. At age 10, 11, I used to fix people's bikes in my street for like £1 that I would take off, I would take off their bad inner tube, give them a new inner tube, repair their bad one, and sell it to the next person. These are old stories. Everyone tells you these stories. But I did do that sort of stuff. Was it because I was an entrepreneur? I don't know. I mean, I was born in Bethnal Green. We're Cockney borough boys, right? We were all just trying to get by. And if you can make a fiver, you made a fiver. I'm not too sure I was an entrepreneur age 11, but I do know that there was a pivotal time at school when a teacher said to me, if you don't start to concentrate, you will only ever drive a van for a living. And it was a weird thing to be said. And I remember thinking, how dare you? But I responded to him, no, I'll have people drive vans for me. And actually, fast forward, one of my first business was a window cleaning and gardening firm, and I did have people driving vans for me. So I think there was this motivation that I knew that, some of my friends from Bethnal Green went off and got jobs. The real route to success out of Bethnal Green, because Bethnal Green Road here, Liverpool Street's at the end, which is the financial district for London, was to get a job as a runner in the stock market. But to get a job as a runner in the stock market, you had to have a GCSE in maths between an A and C. And a few of my friends went straight off to the stock market. They're now brokers making hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. And that was the real route. That's what everybody from Bethnal Green wanted to achieve. But I couldn't achieve that, right? Because I couldn't get that GCSE. So I had to think of something different. I didn't want to be in the pub on a Friday night with my friends, them making 200 quid a week and me signing on the dole. That wasn't going to happen. So I had to find something different. So I made more money than them. I just took a different approach. I cleaned people's windows. I sold cars. I cut lawns. I did stuff. I became useful. Actually, one of Obama's famous speeches on, what was your biggest piece of advice you could give to young people today is to be useful. That I was always very useful. Always, whether it be age 11, fixing people's punctures because they didn't know how to do it, fairy liquid, bowl of water, put it in, look for the bubbles. I was doing that age 11. I was useful age 11 and I'm useful age 45. So I'll always be okay. I'll always make money because people need stuff done.
Yeah. I like the drive there, really. It's what your friend's going to do if they're runners on the stock market. So how do I keep up with them without the maths GCSE? It'd be interesting to see how life would have been if you just about scraped the math GCSE and got the runner's job, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, it could have been very different, eh? But no, I mean, I turned up. I had to work. One of my first jobs, I was doing 12-hour night shifts, doing demolition. So I would turn up in the pub on a Saturday night, having worked 70 hours in the week, but I was getting 580 quid, and I was age 16. I would turn up on a Saturday night with 580 quid in cash in my pocket. I was a god in Bethnal Green. And when you get that feeling, you want more. So it drove me to do more and be more useful.
Yeah, definitely. How did you find being a dyslexic business owner? Like what sort of particular, if you got any kind of really interesting stories on your sort of favorite or least favorite dyslexic moment that kind of twisted business in a way you weren't expecting?
Well, it was really tough, right? Because I was dyslexic, but I was also Cockney. So you won't believe that now talking to me. And sometimes people say to me, oh, talk Cockney. I'm like, well, it's like asking me to talk Indian. It's just an insult, right? I would be doing it no justice. This is the way I talk now. But I was 16 years of age. I had no qualification. I was Cockney and dyslexic. The chances of me running a significant sized business were very, very small. But I knew that I had to change something. I was disguising my dyslexia every day, but I decided to change my accent because I thought in my head that if I had a Cockney accent, people would assume I'm thick, that they would assume I'm not very clever, and then they would find out my dyslexia, and then I would have no chance whatsoever. So I believed in my head that if I spoke with a posh accent, they would never find out. So I used to literally every day, man, this is no lie, every day I would repeat words like how to pronounce my THs. I would literally walk the streets going, thank you, thank you, thank you, like a lunatic. And then it was like a miracle. I went from 16 to 18. My girlfriend at the time was very posh. So it was good practice. But when you talk with a posh accent, nobody looks beneath the surface. It is scary. And that to walk into any government organization in the country and pitch them work and sign contracts, regardless that I couldn't sometimes read the contracts or understand what I was currently getting myself into. But it was simply by changing my accent. Now, my accent is my accent now. And actually, it's something that if there's one thing I regret about my past is that I changed my accent. All of my family, my brothers, sisters, they all still talk with a Cockney accent, and I would love to reverse it, but it would be stupid for me to try and do that now because I would end up with some quasi sort of half posh, half Cockney accent, and I would probably sound stupid. But I do regret it because I feel that it's what society sort of got me. They got me with that one, and that's why I'm so passionate about those with dyslexia coming out as early as possible and saying, yeah, I'm dyslexic. It's not really a terrible thing, and just getting on with it.
Yes, definitely. And it's an interesting one, isn't it? It shows the sort of beliefs that we tell ourselves. Like, you were that committed and that strongly believed about the difference between the Cockney and having a kind of more upper class accent that you completely not only just reprogrammed your brain to be able to switch into it, you jettisoned the whole one and kind of linked into being dyslexic, and you didn't want people to find out your perception of being thick or whatever. So it's scary, isn't it?
I changed my name to James, and I'm christened Jamie. But I believed that James sounded posher too. So I changed my accent, I changed my name, and I went off and set up my first significant business. And I ran that. It was only in the last couple of years of that business when we were turning over, 20 million quid and employing 200 people that I felt confident enough to change my name on my business cards and my email signature back to Jamie. But it's nonsense, right? It's ridiculous, but I did it because I was petrified of being poor. I was absolutely petrified of being poor. So some people say to me, what was your early motivation? I'm not embarrassed to say my early motivation was simply to be wealthy, simply not to be poor. And it was a good motivation to have. My motivations have obviously changed since then. Money means less than what it did then. But it's easier to say when you have it, of course. But that was my motivation for the first 20 years.
So really businesses weren't necessarily passion projects of yours. They were kind of ways that you could make more money and be more useful. So it didn't necessarily matter what the business was in, as long as you could see a way of growing it and growing your wealth.
Absolutely. And still the same today. So, I have 13 companies in my portfolio. I own 2 of them outright. The rest of them sort of significant minorities or minorities. They operate in various different territories, from men's clothing to gyms to data analytics and data security. My interest is in, how do I create value? How do I make a difference in that sector?
Yeah. That's really cool. That's really, really cool. So for a person without GCSEs and dived in the business world and clearly quite successful at it, you decided that authoring would be something you turn your hand to. Now, I'm always in awe of somebody who wants to author a book, because it's something that I've read writing books, and I taught myself how to like reading them. So obviously Unsexy Business, I think, leads its way to what that's probably about, your entrepreneur journey. But really, why do you want to be an author? And then we'll dive into the Dyslexia Edge.
So why did I want to become an author? So I spent the last few years of my first business career attending various networking events where you would sit around a table and people would only be interested in the next digital marketing agency or the next app idea. And it amazed me that there were unsexy businesses like consultancy firms, laundriettes, car dealerships that were turning over 10, 20, 30, 40 million quid, making 10 million pound of profit, and they would get no airtime. No one was interested in them. Everybody was interested in the digital app that had been designed to match dogs with dog walkers that made no money whatsoever. And I wanted to give those, what I believe, those unsung heroes of entrepreneurship that run the businesses that we all use every day, the coffee shop, the cafe, the laundry business. I wanted to give them a platform to share their story because they never got it. So Unsexy Business interviewed 12 entrepreneurs from various industries: Charlie Mullins from Pimlico Plumbers, Duncan Ballantyne from Ballantyne Health Clubs, and various other people, Rami Ranger, who's now in the House of Lords, who just repackaged almost out-of-date biscuits to sell them to Africa. And it gave them the platform to tell their stories. Rami Ranger's business was worth £250 million, but nobody was interested because it wasn't an app. So that was the idea for Unsexy Business. So it was a real passion of mine just to give people that platform. And the Dyslexic Edge, I mean, I'm really fortunate. I hate to do such a significant name drop, but I happened to be spending some time with Sir Richard Branson. Him and I were on a bike ride together. We were talking about dyslexia, ADHD, and sleep issues. And we got onto the subject of why is it that every book that's written about this is written by academics? Why is this not case study led? Why is this not more real for the reader? I happened to spend a few days with Richard, and by the time I left, I said, actually, Richard, I think I'm going to go and do that. I've wanted to do the next book, and this is the one. So I played about with titles for a while, and then came up with the Dyslexic Edge. And the Dyslexic Edge, similar to the format of the other one, we interviewed 14 really successful dyslexic minds. So Paul Orfala from Kinko Print in the US, that set up with $5,000, sold for $4 billion. Sir Charles Dunstan, Carphone Warehouse, £25,000 investment, sold for, I think, £1.9 billion. Duncan Bannatyne, Kelly Hoppen, Theo Paphitis, they're all in this book. I went and spent time with them in their homes. I interviewed many of them one-to-one in their homes, didn't give them any editorial rights, and just extracted their life stories. And then each chapter focuses on one of them, and we tell their life stories. And we also, at the end of the chapter, give some dyslexic thinking tips. So if you're dyslexic, you can take them away. But more importantly, if you're not dyslexic, you can understand how these people have become so successful. The statistics around dyslexia and success, I mean, 35% of all entrepreneurs are considered to be dyslexic. 40% of all self-made millionaires. But unfortunately, so 50% of prisoners. So it's how do you divert that attention away from, committing crime to selling stuff, right? To becoming successful and an entrepreneur, being useful.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's maybe the same spirit, just aimed in the wrong direction.
Exactly the same spirit. The same skills involved in selling cocaine on a street corner are involved in selling double glazing windows or selling mobile phones from a shop on Marylebone High Street, like Sir Charles Dunstan did. They're not too different. It's just about where your energy's focused. And I always say, growing up in Bethnal Green, I mentioned this earlier on, we should never, it's really easy to find people go, oh, look at me, it's all okay. Most people don't ever digest what the reality of their upbringing was. So, it's easy for me to say I was poor, colorblind, ADHD, but the reality is I had a very supportive mother, poor mother, but a really supportive one. I also had a chap, an Indian guy that lived opposite me in a block of flats called Barry, who used to supply frozen food to Indian restaurants, who always had a convertible car. And I saw his car every day. And so I was like, oh, if you work for yourself, you get nice things. I also had a lady at the end of the road who owned the laundrette and the corner shop. So all of these things had an impact on my life.
It's one of the reasons I try to ask people about their childhood and find out they're dyslexic, so you can hear the kind of the shadows and the colours of it all. Because, as you say, it's very easy looking at the names you put in the book and how much money it made and how many risks, like Richard Branson did, phoning up Boeing going, can I lead some planes off you, please? And things like that. And it's like, but actually there's a lot to this. There's a lot more colour to it, and a lot more work goes behind these sort of headline stories.
Of course there is. And, I mean, one of the really interesting interviews in the book was a chap called Wilfred, who is the black farmer. And Wilfred emigrated here from Africa, one of 7, lived in a 2-bedroom flat in Birmingham. You try being dyslexic, an immigrant from Jamaica, living in a 2-bedroom flat with 7 other boys. That is very different from the upbringing that Richard Branson and I had. We all have our different version of how we got there, but it's too simplistic to say that dyslexia is a superpower and don't worry, it will be okay.
Yeah. So, with the interviews in the book, was there a particular sort of nugget of knowledge or a bit of information you're like, wow, that's really cool, and kind of sort of bowled you over, so to speak, without spoiling the book for everybody, obviously.
What one thing I should say, and if there's any of your listeners or viewers that can't afford a copy of the book, reach out to me and I will send them one for free. This isn't about making money for me. This is about trying to change people's perceptions and give people the confidence to come out and say their dyslexia. So if nobody buys the book, I will be equally as happy to spend my time with you tonight, because we are here to serve a purpose, and that is to spread the message. It's not about book sales. But going back to the book, I mean, there are so many great interviews. So, I mean, Wilfred the Black Farmer is brilliant, you know. So Wilfred, he became an entrepreneur because deep in his roots, he thought that he would never be an Englishman unless he owned a part of England. And owning a part of England wasn't a flat in Brixton. It was farmland. He had come to the conclusion that if you own farm, if you're a landowner, you're a British gentleman, you're an English gentleman. That's what led him to become the Black Farmer. And what a brave move of him to go, I'm going to buy a farm, I'm going to try and produce goods and sell them to supermarkets. What am I going to call my brand? And he went, I'm going to call it the Black Farmer. What a brave move. And what a great story. So he went to Waitrose. You asked for a great story. This is a great story. He went to Waitrose. He said, will you stock my sausages? And a few of the other small supermarkets had accepted him by now. And they said, well, we're not really interested. You know, they're Waitrose. They get this approaches all the time. And he said, if you don't stock my sausages, I'm going to take a full page out in I think it was the Sunday Times, saying Waitrose refuses to stock the Black Farmer.
Right.
They still sell his sausages today. Man.
Yeah, leverage for you.
What a brave move. Now that's, you know, some might listen to that and go, how dare he? No, he used what he had available to him and it worked for him. And I use his product. His product is brilliant. It deserves to be in Waitrose. But it was just a small challenger brand facing the difficulty of the buyers of that sector, which is an awful, awful place to try and get into. So that was a great story. Kelly Hoppen, who got thrown in jail in South Africa because she just totally disagreed with the non-Black population being able to stay in the same hotels as white people, so opened up her bedroom window and let her friends sneak in for the night and ended up getting thrown in jail. Duncan Ballantyne, who, you know, punched his naval officer in the face and threw him overboard of a ship and got put into jail for 4 days. The book is unedited by the contributors. So what they said made the book, because I wanted to write a book that the reader got value from. So I didn't want to run the chapters by everybody that contributed so that they could tell their own version of the truth. I wanted to interview them and then take that interview and produce a chapter on them. And there's great stories in there.
Yeah. Wow. Sounds really cool. So let's dive into your sort of writing process. I'm always fascinated how dyslexic people put books together and what sort of tools and hacks they use for making the writing process less, well, not less painful, more dyslexic friendly. So you must have had a hit list of people you wanted to interview. So you get to their places, which, you know, wow, for a start. How did you sort of capture the interview? What were you looking at, and how did you then boil it into a book?
So yeah, it's a great question. So I started, as I do with every idea. So I started with a book of post-its and said, what does the structure of this book feel like? And I had an idea of the title. The title was going to be called The Dyslexic Entrepreneur to begin with. But so I had the dyslexic entrepreneur, and then I decided to widen it from entrepreneurs to just successful people in whatever capacity. And then you sort of do a framework of, okay, well, you want diversity because, as I said earlier on, if you go for English white 75-year-old dyslexic men, it's not going to be a great book. So you start to go, well, what's the story I want to tell? What's important for the reader? And I thought the most important thing for the reader is that diversity. It's got to include female, males, different races, different ages, from different countries, from different territories. Now you don't want to go too wide because you've got to try and fit it into, you know, this. So you don't want to start going, I'm going to go and interview people in India, Africa. etc., etc. So I decided to stick to the US and the UK to give that broad market appeal. And then I started simply by going, well, who do I know that's dyslexic and successful, because they're the easy pickings. But then who do I inspire to talk to? And one of the things I'm good at, and I think most dyslexic people are, is that reaching out to people, asking for help, telling a story, right? So I crafted a short message. And to be honest with you, the only person I knew personally in the book was, I knew Duncan Bannatyne, but that was it. And everybody else I reached out to cold. So, I simply said, let's take Paul Orfler, $4 billion exit of Kinko Print, owned about 4,000 print shops across the world when he sold it. I simply tracked him down online. I had 2 different email addresses that looked like they might get to him or his PA, and I sent them to him. And then I didn't get a response straight away. And then I found some chap in LA that had been mentored by him that was dyslexic, and I reached out to him. And I said to him, I'll come to LA and interview you. And he said, well, when? And I said, well, when can you make? And I flew out the following week, which showed commitment. And when I was with him, I said, do you think you can do me a warm intro to Paul? He said, yes. He introed me to Paul. And 3 weeks later, Paul and I were having lunch in his garden in Santa Barbara in California. And then, which is a great story. So Charles Dunstan, I reached out to Kelly Hoppen and said, Kelly, look, I want to tell this story. I think you'd be important for it. I want a female's version. And she was just lovely. She said, absolutely, come along. So Kelly and I spent half a day together. And then on the way out, I said, look, I don't normally ask this, but do you know anybody else that I might feature? And she said, have you thought about Charles Dunstan? And I said, no, I'd love to get him, actually. And she said, well, just tell him I said that he should consider it. So I dropped I just went through the info at Charles's investment firm and said, Charles, look, I was with Kelly earlier on. I sent a photo of me and Kelly in the email so that it wasn't some, rubbish, cold approach to him. And said, look, I was with Kelly earlier on, and she suggested I reached out. I'd love to interview you for the book. I think you've got a great story to tell. And he said, of course, because people want to help. This is a subject. It's not like I'm calling him to ask him for his top 10 business tips. Now, I got his top 10 business tips, but it's not what I was asking for, right? And I went along and I sat with Charles. And what I must say, the book is brilliant because of its contributors. They were just wonderful. They were so giving with their time. I spent hours and hours in their homes, and not one of them asked for editorial rights. I wouldn't have given them to them, but not one of them asked for them. They simply trusted in me that what they told me, I would do a good job at packaging it and giving it to the reader. So then you go into all these interviews. Sorry, this got quite long. You go into all these interviews and then you get it on paper, you take the transcripts and get it on paper, and then the hard work begins, right? I mean, the first 6 months of storyboarding, flying off to Santa Barbara, meeting Duncan Bannatyne, having lunch, having drinks with Kelly Hoppen, that's all lovely. And then you spend the dreaded 9 months at a kitchen. And I was very much at my kitchen table, paper everywhere because I'm rubbish at working with tech, and scribbling and editing and trying to get something that's readable, that's concise, that adds value. And it's a terrible, I've got ADHD too, so it's a really difficult process. I get totally committed and addicted, working some nights all night for 3-4 nights on a row, just hitting it, changing it. But hopefully you get a brilliant product.
Yeah. Forge it into shape, so to speak. And yeah, well, that'll when it comes out, it'll be for the readers to decide. And it sounds like it's going to be a brilliant product. It's definitely got loads of really interesting interviews, and I like the sound of your approach.
Yeah, look, and writing the book is really, really, really hard work.
Yeah,
but I get 2 or 3 messages a day from people just from the podcast interviews and radio interviews I'm doing about the book, telling me what a positive impact it's had on them. So when the book comes out, it's worth every penny. I had an 11-year-old boy write to me at my home address. His dad said to me, "Could I have an address for you?" I gave him my home address, taking a bit of a risk there, not knowing who's going to. But I gave him my home address because it all seemed genuine. He said, "My son has listened to an interview of yours," and I got this typed letter because his son is dyslexic, and his son said that since listening to my interview, he'd gone into school and spoken to his teacher, and he'd grown in confidence and got the best test results that he's had since starting schooling because his confidence had changed. I mean, that is worth, if the book does nothing else, it's worth every single sleepless night and every dollar I spent on flying to and from the US and interviewing people just for that single person to go, "It helped me."
Yeah, most definitely. Yes, yeah. It's always nice when you get feedback like that. And it is, yeah, you've moved the needle for one person. Sometimes that's all that's needed. Cool. So every guest that comes on the podcast to sort of round the podcast out gets 3 rapid fire questions from myself. They don't need quick answers from you, but they are quick questions from me. What prejudice have you had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
Interesting. So I had a prejudice that I thought that all dyslexic people suffered with sleep issues because I had always suffered with sleep issues, and most dyslexics that you hear about happen to be successful entrepreneurs and they also suffer with sleep issues. So I'd come to that conclusion, but it was only in the research that we did for the book and talking to people that's not true, and that my sleep issues are probably more linked to they are certainly more linked to my ADHD than they are my dyslexia.
Yeah, yeah, I imagine they are. Okay, rapid fire question number 2. If an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
I would do it by telling them that the research in our book points towards. Dyslexia is nothing more than a badge that was conveniently dreamt up by government to deal with an incorrect learning procedure that had been built. You're born with dyslexia, you're born with a deficit. Well, how can I be born with a deficit against something that wasn't even created? We created this thing called learning ourselves. The learning in the most was created by the church so that we didn't have knowledge drain. I would tell an alien that they should forget the term dyslexia, and that there are 2 different types of people in the world, both explorers and exploiters, and those that are explorers have a different way of learning than those that are exploiters.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. That's a nice way of putting it. Okay, and the final question is rapid fire set. And seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack show, what is your favorite dyslexia life hack?
My ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a game changer. I'm really, really fortunate that it came around when I'm just 45 years of age, and I hopefully will get 40 or 50 years of exploiting it. But the power of having ChatGPT in your hands as a 10 or 11-year-old dyslexic is going to be game changing, absolutely game changing. And all AI, but ChatGPT in itself is just hugely powerful.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's going to be, and I see. Yeah, Apple launched the new iPhone yesterday with AI built in, so it's coming to all our sort of devices, and it's going to be really interesting where that goes, particularly for the neurodiverse and dyslexic. I think it's going to be a great tool.
Exactly, but we shouldn't underplay the fact that I keep getting asked, do you think the education system will change massively with AI? And I keep reminding people that they still haven't accepted spell check, so let's not protect ourselves just yet.
Yes, it takes a little while. Okay, before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to add, and where can people find you and your book?
So I'm not great with social media. I find it a real time drain, to be honest with you, but you can connect with me on LinkedIn. And it is me at the other side of that. You can also just go to my website, which is my name.co.uk, and contact me there. And as I said halfway through the interview, and I honestly mean, if there's anybody listening or looking or watching that doesn't genuinely have the funds to buy a copy of the book, drop me a message. I will get a hard copy or a soft copy, or whatever format you like, to you immediately. And for those that do have the means, if you wish to read more about it, go and buy it, share it, and let's hopefully change how people feel about this. What I think is a really important subject. 50% of dyslexic people are currently in UK prisons, and we should try and change that.
Oh, most definitely, most definitely. Well, that leads me to thank you, Jamie, for taking the time to come on the show this evening.
I literally appreciate being given the platform, and I know you probably hear that a lot, but I mean it.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen, and I will speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.